Hi, my name's Starsky and welcome to From the Studio on Clubbing TV. In this episode, we're going to see how you can get the most from a vintage Roland JX3P using a brand new retroactive PG2K, whatever that all means. The JX3P is one of those synths from Roland that nobody really knows about, nobody's played with it that much, but it's becoming a bit more popular now, and that's because everything analog and everything from the 80s is becoming a little bit more popular, and this wasn't really very popular at the time. In fact, people thought it was a little bit rubbish because of the interface and because the filter wasn't quite as juicy and squelchy as it was on other Rolands. And looking at the front panel, we can see we haven't got many knobs, not many controllers. We've got an awful lot of buttons, and they're to select presets, and if we look here, we've got all these really cheesy 80s presets. Start off with strings. So all these presets are a little bit unimaginative and uninspirational because I think people in the 80s or synth manufacturers in the 80s thought synths were going to be a replacement for an orchestra or a backing track or crazy sound effects. So everything's just a little bit Even those simple organ sounds don't really have the depth that you get on a lot of other synths. Then we got brass, which is pure 80s nastiness, isn't it? So you get the idea, those sounds don't jump out at anyone. We've got any synthy things in here. Got one called Planet, so B and 15. Still not exactly inspirational, is it? Let's see, we've got Pulsar. Let's add a bit of reverb. Still not exactly grabbing me. And that was the problem with it, because if you wanted to start editing this, there's nothing on the front panel to edit it with. You can see here we've got this diagram, and that's basically the instructions on how to edit it. So let's pick another tone. Here's one I've made. So to edit that, let's try and change the cutoff frequency, shall we? If we look at this diagram here, the cutoff frequency is 1 with a red circle around it, and that means it's number 1 in group B. So we go to group B in edit, we press 1, and we can see what the frequency is, and it's on 4 at the minute. We wiggle this knob or this slider, and we can see we're changing the frequency. So it is editable, but it's not very easy, is it? If we add some resonance, go back to here, resonance is number 4, edit 4, then go back to edit 1. So it's an okay synth. It hasn't got things like a sub oscillator because you've got the second oscillator. It doesn't have things like PWM either, which gives you instant, big, thick, rich tones by taking the square wave and modulating it and just get these really rich things. You can sort of emulate it on this using the 2 oscillators. It's not quite the same, but just those little things, those little tricks that you'd use on most synths, this didn't have, and it didn't have that really resonant filter. If you put the resonance on full, but let's try doing that pulse width modulation trick on it. So we go to the oscillator 1 and oscillator 2, and we've got to put them on a pulse. So we go to group A, 1, and all of a sudden you just want to give up hope, don't you? These buttons here now change the oscillator wave. The mix, which was 15, then go to oscillator 1's waveform, which is 2. But now we need to open the filter, so we go back into group A, press 1, and then go back into group A 2 again and have a listen to those different wave shapes. So it's a real pain to edit. Yes, you can edit it, and yes, everything's only a button or 2 away, but it's just not the same as having something like this. And now it's starting to sound like a nice, thick, rich analog synth, isn't it? So let's have a little bit of fun and start playing around with it. I'll start off with a really simple tone. And I'll put in a little sequence. Start to write the sequence with this button here. And then play it. It's that simple. We can speed it up. And slow it down, but we can control the speed using the internal sequencer trigger in. So if I click this in, press play, it won't play anything because now I need an external sequencer trigger, which I'm going to get from the TR-8S. And now we can add some drums, and I'm using the TR-8S because it's got all those classic Roland samples from the 80s, so we can do something sort of synth wavy, retro wavy, but it's also got sample capability, so you've got different things in there for big snares with big reverbs on them, plus it's got its own effect. So great little bit of kit for doing stuff like this. So what have we got here? We've got no pattern playing, and on the kicks we've got, it's an 808 snare. Looks like everything's an 808. Okay, so we're going to the kick and we'll find that's 707 because that's really nice. It's got a really 80s style sound. Great snare in this. I know we've got somewhere. Here we go. Pure 80s and the high tom. There we go. Excellent. Then we'll just add some hi-hats maybe. Actually, we'll just leave those on the 808s. Okay, it's empty. Let's create a pattern. We'll use this TR record mode here, which means that we're using these 16 step buttons, just like on any of the 909 or 808s. Snare drum. Let's put some toms in. Hi-hats. Let's put them in just sort of random almost. Maybe an open hat or two at the end. There you go. Nice. Let's add a bit of reverb for a bit of 80s-ness. And maybe a bit of delay as well. That's interesting on the kick. It's got that sort of running up of that hill sort of thing, hasn't it? Nice. Sounds good, doesn't it? And it shows what you can do with a single synth line and a nice effects unit. I've got the X Space here from IK Multimedia, adding those little finishing touches. But there is an alternative, and a little bit of a swerve ball at that. Here I've got the System 8 from Roland. It's their analog circuit behavior modeling synth, and it's got plug outs in it. So this has got in it the System 8 engine, it's got the Jupiter 8 engine, it's got the JX3P engine, and it's got another one, I think it's the 106 as well, or is it the Jupiter 4? And there's loads of other ones that you can get for it. So this should sound like the JX3P. Here we've got their Legendary series, and if we go down, there's the JX3P, and it's yours for, well, it's whatever you want to pay a month. I think it's like £10 or £20 for Ultimate. You can buy the whole thing for $129 for a lifetime key. And of course, if you get this, you can then add all their synthwave patches and all the other goodies they've got for it as well. But you can see here, it's a plug out for the System 8. Go into Logic, there's the 3P, go to plug out, and there you go, that's what I've got in the System 8. So there you have it, the much maligned vintage JX3P all the way from the 80s and the PG2K from the 21st century. One works well, but works much better with the other, and it brings out so much more in the JX3P, especially if you mod it with the Kiwi mods and you get all these different controls. I've not used half the controls on this, but for a couple of £100 extra, you can put a new chip in this and it does lots of extra bits and bobs. So, not cheap. The JX3P, you'll probably be able to get one of those without all the mods and without a little controller unit for around £600, and you'll pay a few £100 more for the controller units, but you add that together, it's still probably not the price of something like the Juno 106 that's only got one oscillator and this has got two. So all different things to think about when buying something like this. But if you can find a bargain, because bargains are to be had, and this is one of the few vintage synths that you can get a bargain on, it's well worth checking it out if you've got a few £100 lying around. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that, and if you did, don't forget you can watch it whenever you like on our Clubbing TV official YouTube channel on the From the Studio playlist. And if you've got any questions, drop them in the comments and I'll see what I can do to answer them. And if you are into this sort of stuff, do check out my Starsky Carr YouTube channel as well, where I've got a lot deeper dive into the PG2K. So I will see you in the next episode of From the Studio.